Welcome to Sleepy Science. Tonight we go beneath the waves, beneath the bright colors and coral shapes. To a world few have seen, coral reefs are alive, not in ways you notice, not in ways you expect. Tiny creatures build cities. Currents carry secrets. Some corals move without moving. Some reefs hide entire communities invisible to the eye. The ocean flows, the sun shifts, and life continues. Quiet, endless, mysterious. Watch closely. Every fact will pull you deeper. Subscribe now and let the reef's hidden world unfold. Before you arrived, the reef had been alive for centuries. Light slipped through the water in fragments, bending and twisting in ways that made shapes appear and vanish. Small shadows shifted across the coral like signals, but no one watched. Polyps stirred silently, opening their tiny mouths, stretching toward invisible currents. They did not know you were here. They did not wait. Energy moved through the algae tucked inside them, converting scattered sunlight into fuel for a world that had no audience. The reef did not pause. It had already begun its day long before you arrived. Particles floated through the water, carried in currents that twisted like secret messages. Coral tentacles reached out, brushing the passing fragments, catching the smallest morsels. Microbes raced across unseen trails, breaking down waste, turning it into food for creatures you could barely notice. Every motion was precise, every interaction purposeful, yet nothing followed rules you could understand. Tiny fish moved between coral branches, disappearing in the shadows as if they were part of the structure itself. Some of them had never left a single colony. They had lived and grown within its walls, navigating narrow channels without knowing the open water even existed. Light itself was deceptive. It refracted, scattered, and revealed parts of the reef only for a moment before hiding them again. Patterns of brightness shifted as if the sun and water were conspiring to create a secret map. The coral responded slowly, almost imperceptibly. Tiny cells in the surface adjusted, stretching pigments, turning sunlight into something useful. It was a partnership no human had arranged. The algae within the coral pulsed quietly, turning photons into energy, feeding a complex machine no one had assembled. The reef was not passive. Currents carved channels through it, moving water like invisible hands. Sediment settled into pockets where only some corals could grow. Ridges formed naturally, creating areas of turbulence and calm, like hidden streets in a city you could not walk. Coral built tunnels and walls, expanding and reshaping the ocean floor, constructing a labyrinth of life that continued whether or not anyone observed. Tiny invertebrates scuttled through the nooks, bacteria thrived in unseen corners, and every particle of food was absorbed or recycled. Nothing was wasted. The system had been perfect long before it had an audience. Some polyps released mucus into the water. It trapped microscopic particles that otherwise would have floated away. The coral drew nutrients from it, feeding in silence, feeding invisibly. Currents carried the excess, spreading the invisible wealth through the surrounding water. Even the smallest details mattered. Microbes in the water broke down the tiniest fragments, converting waste into nourishment for other corals, sponges, and algae. The reef had an entire economy operating under the surface, unseen and unstoppable. Small fish floated between branches, their bodies perfectly aware of the shadows. They paused, darted, and hid with a skill no human could mimic. They lived entirely in one colony, depending on its stability, its growth, and its defenses. In turn, the coral benefited from their presence. Parasites were eaten, algae trimmed, surfaces cleaned. The reef had created symbiotic partnerships, connections that had existed for millennia, yet none of it required human understanding. Each creature played a role, each organism influenced another, and yet nothing was orchestrated. The reef was both machine and society, alive without consciousness, precise without planning. Tiny coral larvae floated on currents, carried for miles without knowing their destination. Survival was a gamble. Some would perish in cold pockets, others swept away by predators. But a few would find a perfect spot, attach themselves, and start the first stage of a new colony. From a single floating speck, a vast reef could rise over centuries. Entire ecosystems depended on this fragile travel. Each larva shaped the next generation of life, determining where shelter and food would exist, shaping the future without ever being aware. Some reefs formed near river mouths. Freshwater mixed with salt, creating unpredictable conditions. Sediment clouded the water. Nutrients surged and disappeared. Only the most adaptable corals could survive here, yet they thrived, forming colonies in shifting environments. Fish, sponges, and algae learned to live with these changes, surviving where other species could not. The reef had taught them resilience long before humans could study it. The river-fed water created patches of life, islands of stability in a sea of uncertainty, and the reef had already mastered it. Ancient coral lineages persisted in certain regions. They carried genes that had existed long before many modern reefs formed. Their structures were unique. Their growth strategies were rare. They survived storms, temperature changes, and shifting currents. Their existence was a record of the past, a secret history written in calcium and pigment. Fish and invertebrates had evolved alongside them, forming communities that relied on structures older than most human civilizations. The reef had preserved knowledge without words, history without recording, wisdom without teachers. Temperature changes occurred daily, yet some corals controlled their internal heat. Biochemical processes shifted subtly, pigments rearranged, fluids moved, and the coral survived heat and cold that would kill less adapted organisms. The algae inside also adjusted, continuing to produce energy even when sunlight faltered. The reef had its own rules of survival, its own hidden engineering, and it followed them without pause. Tiny crevices became nurseries. Juvenile fish, shrimp, and invertebrates hid from predators in the smallest cracks. Adult animals guarded these spaces, ensuring the next generation survived. Coral architecture dictated life itself. The patterns of growth determined who could live, who could hide, who could thrive. Even storms shaped them. Fast-growing corals could repair damage in months, building again where destruction had occurred. They rebuilt, adapted, and created new structures, leaving fragments to form new colonies nearby. Survival was embedded in their speed, their architecture, and their partnerships. Night fell, and the reef changed. Bioluminescence flickered across surfaces. Tiny crustaceans, worms, and fish released pulses of light. The reef became a sky turned upside down. Patterns shifted with the tide. Currents carried pulses through tunnels, illuminating hidden passageways. Glass-like creatures drifted in the deeper areas, nearly invisible except for faint flashes of reflected light. The reef transformed, revealing secrets that only darkness could uncover. Some corals formed frosted, crystalline structures in calm lagoons. Thin branches extended outward, delicate yet strong. Light scattered across the surface, shimmering like ice. These forms were sculpted by currents, sediment, and light, creating microhabitats for the smallest invertebrates. Every structure had a purpose, every gap an opportunity. Life moved in hidden layers, coordinated yet unseen. Even algae adapted. Clouded light or depth changes triggered shifts in metabolism. Pigments changed. Chemical processes switched. Energy continued to flow. The partnership between coral and algae thrived, maintaining life even under fluctuating sunlight. Coral signals communicated across colonies. Polyp released chemicals, guiding feeding, repair, and growth patterns. Boundaries were recognized, allies acknowledged. Information flowed invisibly, quietly, constantly. Natural defenses arose from architecture. Some corals formed ridges that deflected waves. Passes guided migrations of fish and juveniles. Tidal channels funneled water with predictable pulses, bringing oxygen and nutrients deep into the reef. Dense thickets trapped food, creating safe spaces for young creatures. Microplankton clouds floated unseen, sustaining filter feeders. Everything was connected. Nothing waited. The reef was a machine, a society, a secret history written in living stone. It had existed before you arrived and would continue long after you left. The reef had already built its walls before anything moved through them. Coral colonies stretched outward, forming tunnels that twisted and turned like secret corridors. Plates of coral overlapped, creating hidden chambers that would later shelter tiny fish, crustaceans, and invertebrates. Ridges rose from the seafloor, angling outward, shaping currents and diverting water around calmer pools. No creature had designed these spaces. No hand had planned them. Yet safety emerged quietly, naturally, before any eyes could notice. Water slowed as it passed through the dense coral formations. Branches and walls broke the flow into gentle currents, creating pockets where eggs and larvae could settle without being swept away. Sediment fell into these spaces, held in place by coral surfaces, forming soft beds for tiny creatures to rest. The reef reshaped its environment without thought, producing havens before danger arrived. Small fish discovered the tunnels, darting through narrow passages with instinctual precision. They did not build the corridors, yet they used them as if born knowing the path. Safety existed without plan, protection arrived without presence. Some coral plates were smooth, broad, and overlapping. They created ceilings and overhangs that cast shadows across the sand below. Juvenile fish found cover here, small bodies pressed against surfaces that would never crush them. Crustaceans slid into gaps between branches, hiding from predators that would never enter. Tiny organisms made homes in spaces that had been carved by growth and water movement alone. Each crevice, each cavity had its own purpose, even if no one noticed it. Coral architecture had a language of its own, one that guided life without speaking. Currents twisted around ridges, slowed by plates and tunnels, and accelerated through narrow channels. Nutrients were carried deeper into the reef, reaching creatures that had not yet learned to grab them. Polyps extended tentacles to catch passing particles, while sponges filtered water, feeding silently in spaces the reef had created. The architecture itself controlled survival. Even before predators arrived, even before fish hatched, protection was built into the design. Every structure had a secret, a hidden function that made life possible in a world that could be dangerous without warning. Some tunnels were narrow enough to fit a single small fish, winding like hidden paths. Others were wide chambers, holding dozens of juveniles in shadowed safety. The shapes were irregular, unpredictable, and yet perfectly suited for the lives that would occupy them. The coral had no plan, yet it created a system of shelter, channels, and waiting spaces. Fish discovered these areas and stayed, growing familiar with twists and bends. Their instincts told them where to hide, where to feed, and where danger could never reach. Safety emerged long before it was needed, born from structure, not awareness. At night, currents slowed and the reef changed shape with the water. Channels became still pools, tunnels held calm, and light faded into the shadows of the branches. Tiny organisms shifted, sensing the changes without thought. Fish huddled in alcoves, crustaceans pressed into hidden corners, larvae remained in pockets of still water. Every space created by the coral offered protection before predators had arrived. The reef itself became a guardian, silent and unmoving, offering refuge simply because it existed. Some corals grew in plates stacked like layers of a city. Water slipped over each level, slowed by the surface above, redirected into gaps and channels. Fish moved with ease through these layers, gliding into areas that were never built for them but perfectly suited to their size and movement. Protection emerged without design. Currents shaped the habitat as much as the coral itself. Even the tiniest details mattered. Every ridge and every overhang produced safety that no one had anticipated. Small fish learned to follow currents that twisted through tunnels and around ridges. They discovered feeding pockets, areas rich with plankton, waiting in spaces created by the reef before any creature had claimed them. Juveniles navigated narrow passages with instinctive skill, avoiding predators that had yet to enter. The coral's architecture had anticipated survival long before the fish had hatched. The reef had become both stage and shield, theater and fortress, without knowing it. Sediment fell into quiet pools, trapped by walls of coral, forming soft beds that would cradle delicate larvae. Tiny creatures used these spaces to rest, feed, and grow. Even the smallest details mattered. Every ridge, every plate, every twist in the tunnel created an ecosystem of waiting opportunities. Life arrived later, yet safety had been built in advance. Nothing was accidental, yet nothing was planned. The reef operated as a machine of survival, invisible and precise, quietly shaping life before the first creature even noticed. Crustaceans scuttled across surfaces, exploring channels that had formed naturally. They moved into hidden corners, discovering spaces that reduced water flow and protected them from sudden surges. The architecture created zones of turbulence and calm. Fish discovered these zones and learned to use them for hunting and hiding. Protection existed before danger, corridors existed before movement, and tunnels existed before life. Every structure was a quiet experiment in survival, repeated over centuries, yet unseen. Ridges formed natural shields against currents and predators. Water poured against the reef's edges and spilled into calmer interiors, creating safe zones without thought or direction. Juvenile fish and invertebrates used these areas to feed, hide, and grow. The architecture itself guided life. Coral plates redirected flow, twisted light, and formed shadows where prey could hide from hunters. The reef was alive, active, and protective without intent. Safety appeared as a byproduct of growth, design emerging from necessity without awareness. Even algae used the spaces unintentionally created by coral. Shaded areas allowed certain species to thrive, providing food for grazers that had not yet arrived. Tiny microorganisms filtered nutrients from quiet pools, sustaining life in spaces shaped by architecture. Currents carried food, larvae, and oxygen through channels before anyone had claimed the space. Life discovered the patterns. Fish learned the tunnels, crustaceans explored the gaps, and juveniles found safe corners. The reef's design had created a blueprint for survival before survival had begun. Some coral branches grew into dense thickets. Narrow spaces between them trapped plankton, slowed currents, and offered hiding spots for creatures that would never build the thicket themselves. Fish, shrimps, and larvae found shelter, their survival written into the patterns of coral growth. Even if danger had never arrived, the structures existed to protect. Tunnels became sanctuaries, plates became roofs, and ridges became shields. The reef had built safety into its very form, long before it had an audience. Every level of the reef had its own function. Overhangs provided shade, narrow tunnels offered refuge, ridges redirected water, and channels carried nutrients. Fish learned, adapted, and discovered these areas, yet none of it had been created with them in mind. Safety emerged by accident. Protection arrived without knowledge. Coral architecture had already solved the puzzle of survival before life discovered the solutions. Every creature that entered found a world prepared for it, corridors waiting, tunnels built, and rooms ready. Even the tiniest details mattered. Water slipping across ridges formed currents that transported food into quiet chambers. Shadows created by plates and branches guided prey and predators alike. Every tunnel led to shelter, every channel carried sustenance. Fish, shrimp, and juvenile creatures moved through the spaces as if following a secret map. Protection existed where danger had never arrived yet. The reef had created opportunity, security, and structure without thought, planning, or awareness. It had simply grown. The reef was a machine that operated before observation. Life discovered the corridors, tunnels, and plates as they explored, but the architecture existed first. Safety emerged without warning, protection existed before threat, and tunnels waited for creatures that would only arrive much later. Currents slowed, channels formed, and algae grew in shadowed corners. Every structure was a step in survival, built silently, perfectly, and invisibly. The reef had anticipated life before it began, and it would continue to do so long after any observer left. Energy flowed across the reef like a secret current, invisible but constant. Nothing seemed to move, yet life was busy all around. Tiny particles, fragments of plankton and organic dust traveled through water unseen. Fish mouths opened, polyps extended their tentacles, and sponges filtered water, catching what passed without chasing. The reef fed itself quietly, as if it had invented a way to eat without movement. Most feeding happened where nothing seemed to happen at all. Clouds of plankton appeared and disappeared in the water above coral branches. They floated with the currents, weaving through tunnels, channels, and narrow spaces. Juvenile fish found their meals without searching. Tiny shrimps filtered particles while remaining still, almost invisible in the shadows. Coral polyps extended and retracted, opening mouths to catch invisible food, timing every motion with currents too fine to notice. Feeding was a silent exchange, a hidden system that worked even when the reef seemed motionless. Water carried nutrients along paths shaped by ridges and plates. Sponges filtered the smallest fragments, extracting energy from what the eye could not see. Algae absorbed sunlight and shared it with corals, feeding them in invisible cycles. Microbes recycled waste into tiny bursts of sustenance. Each particle of food followed invisible pathways, moving like weather, never hurried, never noticed, yet always reaching those who depended on it. The reef seemed calm, but underneath, energy moved constantly, quietly, and efficiently. Polyps opened at random intervals, sensing currents rather than prey. They caught particles that floated past in the tiniest bursts of movement. Nothing was chased. Nothing was hunted in the traditional sense. The reef itself had become a conveyor system, carrying energy from one organism to another without anyone directing it. Tiny creatures discovered the bounty as they moved, unaware that their food had been guided to them by the architecture of the reef itself. Even when water appeared still, nutrients were traveling. Microplankton shifted with subtle eddies around ridges and plates. Tiny crustaceans scuttled across surfaces to catch passing fragments. Juvenile fish positioned themselves in shadowed channels, letting currents deliver meals directly to their mouths. No one had to move fast. The reef fed itself while appearing motionless, a silent machine consuming energy and redistributing it with precision. The surface of the reef was a web of hidden motion. Polyp tentacles twitched and flexed, brushing against invisible clouds of plankton. Tiny particles clung to mucus layers on coral surfaces, drawn inward to nourish tissues. Sponges continued their filtering work, drawing water into chambers filled with unseen life. Algae converted light into energy, feeding themselves and their coral partners without a sound. The reef's energy system moved continuously, invisible yet undeniable. Currents shaped the delivery of food. Water funneled through tunnels, over ridges and around plates, carrying plankton and particles directly to waiting mouths. Even the smallest detail mattered. A tiny fold in coral tissue, a narrow gap between branches, a shallow depression on a plate could change where nutrients ended up. Fish learned to position themselves in these micro-pathways, but they had no idea that the architecture itself guided the food. Feeding happened where no one expected it, where nothing seemed alive, and yet the reef ate. Microbes contributed silently. Tiny bacteria converted waste into usable nutrients, feeding algae and coral without a single motion visible to the eye. Polyps absorbed compounds released by sponges and other animals. Life fed life through invisible exchanges. Even larvae carried energy along their path, unknowingly adding to the reef cycle. The system worked without observers, without predators, and without intention. Energy moved, feeding occurred, and the reef grew, all while appearing still. Some coral colonies created mucus trails that trapped carbon fragments. These particles were tiny, almost microscopic, yet they carried essential energy. As water passed across coral surfaces, the mucus held particles long enough for polyps to absorb nutrients before releasing the remainder. Tiny clouds of plankton were captured, transported, and consumed without anyone noticing. Feeding was a process hidden in plain sight. The reef ate while appearing motionless, a secret operation that repeated countless times each day. Even small fish used this hidden conveyor. Juveniles positioned themselves where currents slowed, letting plankton float directly into their mouths. Tiny shrimps collected particles caught in coral mucus or trapped in plates. Crustaceans filtered water through coral channels, taking in nourishment without swimming far. Every organism had its place, every particle had a path, and energy moved silently through the reef as though it had its own mind. Nutrients were never wasted. Microbes broke down every fragment that fell from fish, invertebrates, or coral tissue. Compounds were recycled into forms algae could use. Algae converted light into energy, sharing it with corals. Polyp tentacles absorbed the smallest molecules from passing water. Even sponges trapped particles too fine to see. The reef consumed energy invisibly, storing it, converting it, and delivering it where needed. Some energy moved faster, riding stronger currents through tunnels and ridges. Other nutrients lingered, caught in tiny pockets created by plates or branches. Fish adapted to these rhythms, positioning themselves to receive the slow, steady flow of invisible meals. Sponges adjusted their filtering rates according to current speed. Polyps flexed their tentacles when water slowed. Feeding was a coordinated dance guided by the movement of energy, not by any mind. The reef itself orchestrated every action. Clouds of microplankton formed patterns that shifted with water flow. Juvenile fish learned these invisible lines, following them to pockets of food. Shrimps and small crabs filtered the same streams. Polyps extended and retracted in silent timing with invisible particles. No one chased their meals. No one had to search. The reef brought the food to them. Most feeding happened where nothing seemed to move, where nothing seemed alive, and yet energy passed through every organism. Even algae switched modes when sunlight changed. On cloudy days or in shaded areas, algae used stored compounds to continue providing energy to corals. Polyps absorbed this energy without sensing the change. Sponges filtered water containing tiny fragments, feeding themselves and their inhabitants. Tiny larvae found microplankton delivered by currents shaped by coral ridges. Life fed life in ways too small to notice, yet essential to survival. The reef maintained its energy system day and night. When currents slowed at night, feeding patterns shifted, but no process stopped. Polyps and sponges continued their quiet work. Tiny fish and crustaceans moved to areas where nutrients collected. Algae continued photosynthesis under dim light or used stored energy. Invisible clouds of plankton and particles flowed through tunnels and channels, reaching every corner. Most feeding happened where nothing seemed to move, where stillness was the disguise of constant activity. The architecture of the reef directed the invisible paths of energy. Plates, ridges, tunnels, and branches all guided currents. Water brought particles to every waiting mouth. Every small adjustment mattered. Fish learned to position themselves. Sponges adjusted filtering, polyps timed their tentacles, and algae shared energy. Life was sustained in spaces too small or subtle to see. Energy moved without intention, feeding happened without awareness, and the reef grew stronger while appearing still. Even the smallest details contributed. A fold in coral tissue could trap particles. A narrow gap between plates could redirect water with nutrients. Tiny twists in tunnels created pockets of calm where juveniles could feed. Every micropath had a purpose, even if no one ever noticed it. Energy moved invisibly, feeding occurred silently, and the reef consumed itself and all it contained without showing a trace. The reef was a quiet machine, a system of invisible energy and constant feeding. Polyps absorbed nutrients from water moving through channels. Fish took in microplankton carried by currents shaped by architecture. Sponges filtered tiny particles, algae converted light into energy, and microbes recycled waste. Nothing seemed alive, yet the reef was constantly eating, constantly moving, constantly sustaining every life form it touched. Most feeding happened where nothing seemed to move, in places no one could see, yet every moment counted. Storms came without warning. Waves struck the reef with force, breaking branches, flipping plates, and sending fragments into the water. Tiny polyps clung to skeletons, holding on as currents pulled at every surface. From above, the reef seemed torn apart, but below the system barely paused. Energy flowed. Life continued. Destruction did not interrupt the process. It fed it. Fragments that broke away were not lost. Some settled nearby, starting new colonies almost instantly. Tiny larvae found the exposed surfaces, attaching where space had opened. Polyps extended, rebuilding tissues across broken skeletons. Growth happened faster than anyone could track. The reef remembered damage only to use it, shaping new forms that had never existed before. Each storm rewrote the reef in subtle ways, leaving marks that guided the next generation of life. Even after the fiercest waves, coral tissue expanded rapidly. Branches spread across exposed plates. Ridge lines shifted as new skeletons formed. The shapes were not identical to what had existed, but they fit the reef's needs perfectly. Polyps coordinated with unseen signals, producing mucus, capturing particles, and sealing vulnerable areas. Sponges adjusted filtering rates to match altered currents. Algae shared energy with coral partners that had lost tissue. The reef adapted. Damage became a direction, not a stop. Fragments carried by waves could settle in unexpected places. Some landed on bare rocks, beginning colonies in areas the reef had never occupied before. Others lodged between plates or in crevices, finding protection from predators while slowly growing. Each tiny fragment contained the memory of the parent colony, yet it also learned from its new location. Growth was both inheritance and invention, guided by broken structures and unseen currents. The reef turned destruction into creation. Polyps that survived storm damage shifted their behavior. Tentacles extended at new angles to catch particles redirected by broken ridges. Mucus layers thickened where fragments were loose, protecting tissues and feeding themselves at the same time. Tiny juvenile fish found new shelter in spaces created by collapse. Even creatures that had no idea the storm had passed adjusted to the changed environment, using new hiding places, new channels, and new currents. The system had no pause button. It flowed forward. Storms also redistributed sediments. Plates and tunnels that had been hidden were exposed. New pockets of calm water appeared where turbulence had scoured old structures. Microbes colonized freshly available surfaces, breaking down small particles that had settled. Algae quickly occupied spaces with sunlight. Polyps filled gaps in skeletons, regrowing tissue with astonishing speed. Recovery was faster than memory, faster than anyone could watch. The reef had a rhythm that outpaced understanding. Even in destruction, energy moved efficiently. Broken branches released tiny fragments of tissue that fed sponges and microbes. Polyps captured particles carried by new currents. Juvenile fish fed in newly formed channels where plankton accumulated. Algae converted scattered light into energy for themselves and their coral partners. Nothing was wasted. Damage redirected life rather than ending it. Every disturbance became a signal for the reef to rearrange itself, to feed itself, to grow in ways unseen. Corals adapted their skeletons after breakage. Branches grew in unusual angles, plates thickened where waves had been strongest, and ridges extended to redirect currents. Each regrowth reshaped water flow, influencing feeding patterns and the delivery of nutrients. Microhabitats formed where none had existed. Juvenile fish discovered new hiding places. Tiny shrimps filtered particles in fresh tunnels. Even the smallest creatures adjusted, following invisible paths created by damage. Destruction became a blueprint for the next stage of life. Algae shifted to cover exposed surfaces. Light reached areas that had been shaded before. Photosynthesis increased in spots touched by broken plates. Polyps absorbed this energy, accelerating tissue repair. Sponges pumped water through new channels, cleaning sediments and redistributing nutrients. Microbes processed every particle of waste, creating invisible clouds of food for fish. Life adapted instantly. No one noticed the invisible work, yet the reef rebuilt itself without pause. Storms also moved animals. Small fish and invertebrates were tossed into new territories, finding shelter among broken branches or in tunnels created by shifted plates. Some adapted immediately, using the damage to escape predators or find new feeding grounds. Fragments of coral became homes. Algae patches created new food sources. The reef used destruction as a tool to rearrange its communities, to reshape energy flow, and to diversify life in ways that storms had forced upon it. Even the smallest polyps played a role. Tentacles extended to catch particles redirected by new channels. Mucus captured tiny fragments that had settled after storms. Microbes colonized fresh surfaces created by breakage. Energy moved in unseen currents, feeding organisms that had survived and those that had newly arrived. Recovery was not just replacement. It was evolution in miniature. Damage became an instruction, guiding growth, feeding, and life itself. Fragments that landed far from the original colony started new stories. Tiny larvae attached to broken plates or exposed rocks, forming colonies that would grow into structures feeding fish, sponges, and other corals. The reef was no longer one continuous structure. It had become a network of opportunities created by damage. Every storm added pieces to the puzzle, every wave rearranged threads of life, and every broken branch became a seed for future growth. Destruction fed creation. Even during repeated storms, the reef maintained its hidden systems. Currents continued to carry plankton to polyps. Sponges filtered water in newly formed tunnels. Microbes recycled particles from broken tissue. Juvenile fish hid in new crevices. Algae converted light in places they had not occupied before. Energy moved without interruption, feeding life even as the reef's architecture changed. The process never stopped. Damage did not interrupt it. It guided it. Polyps adjusted their chemical signals after breakage. They communicated with neighboring colonies, coordinating tissue repair and feeding patterns. Growth followed invisible instructions created by past destruction. Tiny creatures adapted their behavior to new currents and hiding places. Juvenile fish explored altered tunnels and plates. Shrimps filtered water along new paths. Even the smallest particles of energy followed new trajectories, feeding organisms in ways shaped by damage. Recovery was faster than memory. The reef rebuilt structures before anyone noticed they were gone. New ridges formed, new tunnels appeared, new plates extended into open water. Currents were redirected, plankton collected in pockets that had not existed, and energy flowed into every organism. The reef's memory was not in what it had been, but in how it responded. Every storm, every wave, every broken branch became part of an invisible plan for life to continue. The reef never paused. Each fragment of coral, each displaced juvenile, each redistributed particle became a thread in the ongoing story. Destruction did not end the reef. It fed it. Energy moved through broken spaces, feeding polyps, sponges, fish, and algae. Microbes recycled what seemed lost. New colonies began where others had ended. Growth and repair happened faster than anyone could track. The reef used stress to create opportunity, turning damage into innovation, turning storms into a system of invisible guidance. Even after repeated waves of destruction, life continued in patterns no one could predict. Tiny fragments grew into new colonies. Juvenile fish adapted to changing shelters. Microbes colonized fresh surfaces. Energy flowed in invisible pathways created by broken structures. Currents carried particles to waiting mouths. Polyps rebuilt tissues in irregular shapes. Plates and ridges shifted. The reef itself became a machine of recovery, turning every storm into a tool for growth. Nothing stopped. Nothing paused. Every wave, every fragment, every broken branch fed the reef. Polyps, fish, sponges, algae, and microbes all responded without pause. Energy moved along unseen paths. Food found waiting mouths. Growth happened faster than memory. Destruction became opportunity, stress became direction, and storms became guides. The reef did not merely survive. It used every interruption to thrive. Beneath the waves, life was quietly at work. Tiny creatures moved inside the coral, carving spaces no one had built intentionally. Snails scraped at surfaces, creating grooves that became small tunnels. Shrimp chewed at soft tissue, hollowing chambers just big enough to hide. Worms tunneled through the mineral structures, their tiny bodies shaping passageways. No one had planned these homes, yet they appeared naturally. Some architecture is built by those meant to be inside it. The coral responded without thought. Branches curved around the intrusions, sealing gaps while leaving space for the small residents. Plates grew outward, reshaping edges to accommodate hidden life. The living stone adjusted, tissue extending over newly hollowed chambers, forming smooth walls inside rough tunnels. Tiny polyps continued feeding, their tentacles stretching over new surfaces. The reef adapted to intrusion as if it had always expected it. Microbes flourished in the hidden spaces. Their colonies formed along the walls of tunnels created by creatures gnawing or scraping. They filtered water, capturing particles too small for larger animals to notice. Nutrients from coral tissue, algae, and passing plankton cycled through these chambers. The hidden engineers unknowingly fueled entire microecosystems. Life inside life moved quietly, unseen by the casual observer, yet essential to the reef's survival. Juvenile fish discovered these chambers first. They slipped into tunnels too narrow for predators to follow. Their translucent bodies reflected only fragments of light, blending with the coral walls. They stayed close to the tiny residents, moving carefully to avoid disturbance. Shelter formed before intention. Protection existed even where danger had never arrived yet. Small fish learned the invisible maps of tunnels, returning again and again to the same hidden spaces. Snails continued their slow work. They rasped algae that grew on the coral surface, shaping patches into smooth curves. Their movement was deliberate but unseen, creating walls and tiny steps inside living stone. The coral did not resist. Instead, it grew around these modifications. Branches thickened at edges, plates expanded along grooves, and tissue strengthened around tunnels. Growth followed intrusion, a silent negotiation between host and inhabitant. Shrimp carved spaces with careful persistence. Tiny mandibles removed fragments of coral tissue, leaving chambers behind. These spaces became nurseries for small crustaceans, hiding places for juvenile fish, and resting spots for larvae passing through. The coral did not require consent. It adjusted. The intruders shaped the environment and the reef responded, forming a delicate coexistence without agreement. Worms tunneled deeper, forming irregular chambers within older coral skeletons. Their work released particles that microbes converted into food. Sponges filtered this nutrient-rich water, passing it along to nearby polyps. Even algae benefited from subtle changes in light caused by tiny holes and hollows. The reef's architecture, once solid, had become alive in a new way. Hidden engineers altered energy flow, nutrient distribution, and shelter simultaneously, without anyone noticing. The work of these small creatures was slow but consistent. Day by day, new chambers appeared. Juvenile fish found more hiding places. Microbes colonized every surface. Algae adjusted pigments to reach light entering from unexpected angles. Every intrusion caused subtle changes in water movement, slowing currents in some areas, creating turbulence in others. The reef used this disturbance to spread energy efficiently. Even tiny gnawings became a guide for life. Polyps reacted in real time. Tentacles extended to feed in newly available spaces. Mucus trapped drifting particles in the tunnels. Tissue grew along scraped surfaces, smoothing walls and stabilizing fragile structures. Energy flowed from one chamber to the next. Small animals benefited, yet the reef remained whole. The system had no master plan, only invisible responses that allowed coexistence to emerge. Juvenile invertebrates explored the new architecture. Tiny shrimps moved into hidden tunnels, finding protection from predators. Snails that had carved the space for themselves now shared it unknowingly. Small fish grazed on algae growing in walls scraped by previous residents. Microbes recycled waste and particles, forming clouds of invisible energy for everyone. Life overlapped in layers, each dependent on the unseen work of others. Even the shapes of the coral changed over time. Branches extended along tunnels, following the curves carved by residents. Plates adjusted, thickening where scraping had weakened surfaces. The living stone itself became a collaborative canvas, shaped by both coral growth and the labor of tiny creatures. No meetings, no commands, no thought, just continuous interaction. The reef became a shared machine, functioning with precision without awareness. Algae moved into the hollows left by rasping snails. Pigments shifted to reach light that filtered down unevenly. Photosynthesis increased in patches that had been shaded before. Nutrients flowed into polyps nearby. Tiny chambers became energy hubs as well as safe spaces. Even the smallest creatures influenced the reef's efficiency. Coexistence emerged from persistence, not agreement. Some tunnels connected over time, forming networks too complex to map by eye. Juvenile fish moved freely through these hidden corridors, avoiding predators. Crustaceans fed in one chamber and rested in another. Microbes spread along walls, recycling particles into nutrients for algae and polyps. Currents flowed differently, carrying food and oxygen more efficiently. The architecture built by intruders enhanced the reef, even though no one planned it. Tiny shells accumulated along chamber floors, forming unexpected structures. Water currents shifted around these new obstacles, slowing in some areas and accelerating in others. Polyps adjusted feeding tentacles to match the new patterns. Microbes filtered water more effectively. Juvenile fish discovered new hiding spots. The reef responded instantly, growing tissue to stabilize tunnels and maintain flow. Life had no leader, yet coordination emerged naturally. Even broken fragments from storms became part of this hidden engineering. Small creatures settled in cracks and hollows, shaping tunnels that fed life in multiple layers. Coral tissue extended around them, strengthening fragile edges. Energy moved through new paths, feeding algae, microbes, and polyps. Juvenile fish explored corridors formed by chance and persistence. Architecture emerged not from intention but from interaction. Over weeks and months, the reef became a living labyrinth. Tunnels, chambers, and hollows multiplied, each supporting microecosystems. Tiny snails, shrimp, worms, juvenile fish, algae, and microbes all contributed to the continuous flow of energy and shelter. Coral tissue adapted to accommodate the hidden residents. The system was invisible, quiet, yet perfectly organized. Life inside life continued. Polyps fed in new spaces, mucus captured particles, and tissue strengthened tunnels. Microbes recycled waste and distributed nutrients. Juvenile fish learned every hidden path. Algae adjusted pigments to follow light through intricate corridors. The reef's architecture evolved without planning. Some chambers existed only because they were occupied. Some tunnels guided water because they had been carved. Small creatures shaped the reef from the inside, and the coral responded, forming homes for those it had never agreed to shelter. Even the smallest gnawings mattered. Tiny fragments of coral tissue, algae growth, or sediment accumulation influenced the flow of energy, the placement of food, and the movement of water. Polyps extended, adjusted, and grew around every change. Microbes multiplied, recycling every particle. Juvenile fish explored with care, avoiding predators and finding food. Life created structures, and structures guided life. Some architecture is built by those meant to be inside it, and the reef adapted seamlessly. Some reefs exist where life seems impossible. Water glows bright under the sun, yet its heat presses against every surface. Salinity rises and falls unpredictably, sometimes too high for many creatures to survive. Nutrients vanish quickly, leaving little to feed on. Strong currents rush over the coral, tugging branches and scattering sediments. These places should be empty. They should fail. Yet the reefs endure. The harshest places reveal the most efficient systems. In the Red Sea, coral grows under heat that would burn weaker species. Each polyp adjusts carefully, regulating internal temperature to avoid damage. The algae inside their tissues continue photosynthesis even as sunlight intensifies. Tiny fluid movements inside coral keep cells from overheating. Energy is balanced so precisely that no resource is wasted. Polyps feed on plankton and particles that pass by, capturing enough to survive even when nothing seems abundant. The reef does not expand recklessly. It survives through precision. In the coral triangle, storms, currents, and tides constantly reshape the water. Coral is battered by waves and sediments. Branches break, plates tilt, ridges collapse. Each reef responds without hesitation. Damaged tissue grows back quickly, often in shapes that are different from the original. Broken fragments settle nearby, becoming new colonies. Life continues where it should have ended. Growth is measured. Expansion happens only when conditions allow, but survival never waits. Some reefs cling to river mouths, where freshwater mixes with the ocean. Sediments cloud the water, and nutrients surge suddenly before disappearing. Salinity changes within hours. Most coral avoids these zones, yet some species have adapted. Their polyps and algae endure rapid fluctuations. Tissues adjust to maintain internal balance. Branches grow in patterns that let currents pass without collapsing. These reefs do not reach outward aggressively. Instead, they exist in harmony with the environment, shaping themselves to the limits imposed by river flow. Every movement is calculated. The smallest creatures play crucial roles. Tiny shrimp, snails, and worms sense changes in temperature, salinity, and nutrients. They move into sheltered chambers or tunnels within coral. Their grazing and scraping maintain surfaces, allowing algae to thrive even when light is scarce. Microbes recycle waste, converting particles into forms that polyps and algae can absorb. Nutrient cycles occur in tight loops. In extreme conditions, no particle is wasted. The reef becomes a closed system, self-sustaining in ways invisible to the eye. Heat waves challenge coral daily. Internal processes shift to prevent cells from overheating. Pigments absorb less light and fluids move to balance energy. Polyps withdraw partially when sunlight becomes too strong, extending only when conditions are right. Algae inside adjust photosynthesis, slowing down to avoid damage. Every reaction happens quickly, without pause. Even in the hottest conditions, life continues. Survival depends not on expansion but on control and adaptation. Salinity rises near some reefs when freshwater evaporates or rivers surge. Coral polyps adjust osmotic pressure inside their tissues. Tiny changes in water content protect cells from swelling or shrinking. Microbes inside coral also adapt, maintaining the chemical environment necessary for life. Algae shift pigments to keep photosynthesis efficient despite changes. Energy is conserved. Nothing is wasted. Life continues where most species would fail, demonstrating how extreme conditions force precision. Currents shape turbulence across reefs. Waves tug at branches, sending sediments into tunnels. Coral plates tilt, ridges bend, and channels form. Polyps sense water movement, extending tentacles only when feeding is efficient. Juvenile fish use the turbulence to hide or find food, moving with currents rather than fighting them. Microbes in hidden chambers respond to shifts, recycling nutrients more efficiently when particles are concentrated. Even small disturbances enhance survival. The reef uses turbulence to its advantage, not despite it. Light in extreme zones is uneven. Cloud cover, sediment, and depth reduce sunlight at different times. Coral and algae adjust continuously. Pigments shift, tissues expand or contract, and photosynthesis adapts. Energy is extracted from every photon available. Even in low light, polyps feed efficiently. Nutrient capture continues. Life is not slowed, only measured. Extreme conditions sharpen the reef's efficiency, making every interaction more precise. Some species survive where storms frequently sweep the area. Branches break, ridges topple, and surfaces scrape. Recovery is faster than the damage. Coral grows in new directions, forming unusual shapes adapted to wave patterns. Broken fragments settle nearby, forming colonies that stabilize sediment and redirect currents. The reef becomes both shield and machine, absorbing chaos and converting it into life. Destruction does not interrupt the process. It feeds it. Hidden chambers within coral are essential in extreme zones. Tiny engineers create tunnels, hollow spaces, and grooves. Microbes colonize walls, recycling nutrients. Juvenile fish find shelter from strong currents, predators, and temperature spikes. Every small intrusion improves the efficiency of energy flow. Life emerges from adaptation, not intention. The harsh environment forces each participant to contribute precisely. Efficiency becomes survival. Even algae show adaptability. When sunlight fades, they switch to alternative chemical pathways. Stored energy becomes usable, pigments rearrange, and metabolism slows without stopping. The reef continues to feed itself while appearing still. Nutrients cycle in invisible currents, recycled by microbes and polyps. Juvenile fish feed in protected areas created by the coral's architecture. Life continues quietly but intensely, invisible from above the surface. Rivers introduce sudden changes in temperature, salinity, and nutrients. Coral responds in real time, adjusting tissue density, mucus production, and feeding patterns. Algae shift pigments, and microbes recycle particles efficiently. Tiny creatures navigate tunnels to find shelter. Juvenile fish feed in hidden chambers. Energy moves in cycles that are precise and invisible. Survival is not random. It is orchestrated by adaptation at every scale. Some reefs seem frozen in time. Branches appear fragile, plates spread evenly, and ridges form naturally. They endure heat, salinity, and turbulence, surviving years without expansion. Each polyp functions as part of a larger system, feeding, absorbing, and responding in synchronization. Hidden engineers contribute silently. Energy flows, nutrients cycle, and life persists. Efficiency governs every action. Even small disturbances enhance life. Waves, sediments, temperature shifts, and nutrient surges are absorbed by coral architecture. Polyps grow along new angles. Microbes recycle particles faster. Juvenile fish explore hidden spaces created by chance or intrusion. Algae adjust. Energy flows efficiently. The reef thrives where others would fail. Harsh conditions do not prevent life, they sharpen it. In extreme zones, survival depends on precision. Coral maintains tissue balance, algae adapts to changing light, microbes recycle nutrients, and hidden creatures maintain chambers. Juvenile fish move with currents and turbulence. Tiny snails scrape surfaces, creating shelter and nutrient pathways. Every particle, every photon, every movement is used. Nothing is wasted. The reef exists as a self-sustaining system, alive and precise. Across the Red Sea, Coral Triangle, and river mouths, life demonstrates the same truth. Harsh conditions select efficiency. Coral does not grow wildly or recklessly. Polyps feed only when it benefits them. Algae adjust for maximum energy. Microbes recycle every particle. Hidden engineers carve tunnels, and juvenile fish explore them. Turbulence, light, temperature, and salinity are challenges that the reef converts into survival. Even in what seems like failure, life thrives. Branches bend instead of breaking, plates stabilize, tunnels form. Energy is captured and recycled. Nutrients cycle through polyps, microbes, and algae. Juvenile fish move safely. Tiny creatures build chambers that feed the system. Coral survives not by avoiding stress, but by using it to sharpen its efficiency. Extreme environments are not a limit, they are a test, and the reef passes without pause. Every interaction is precise. Every particle matters. Every photon is used. Life in extreme reefs continues quietly, efficiently, and invisibly. Heat, salt, low nutrients, and turbulence do not stop growth. They refine it. Coral does not expand wildly, yet it survives perfectly. Hidden chambers, tiny engineers, juvenile fish, algae, and microbes all contribute to a system designed by adaptation, not thought. Harshness reveals mastery. Beneath the living surface of a reef lies a hidden history. Layers of skeletons from corals long gone rest beneath the new growth. Each branch, each plate, each ridge builds upon the ones that came before. The reef is older than most human civilizations. It has existed through storms, sea level changes, and shifting currents. It holds memories of oceans that no longer exist. The reef remembers more than we ever could. When you look at a coral plateau, you see a single structure. But inside, time stacks silently. Ancient coral skeletons are sealed beneath layers of living tissue. Tiny polyps grow on top of old forms, expanding slowly but carefully. They do not destroy the past, they preserve it. Each new generation adds to the story. It is a record written in stone. Fossilized fragments, broken branches, and hardened ridges create a framework that guides current growth. The present rests on these stacked pasts, building on what has survived. Reefs keep secrets of climate that no book could capture. The thickness of coral layers, the density of skeletons, and the patterns of growth all record temperature, salinity, and nutrient changes over centuries. Researchers can study these structures to understand ocean conditions hundreds, even thousands of years ago. Each layer is a quiet witness, holding chemical traces and growth markers that reflect past environments. The reef records more than life. It stores the story of the ocean itself. Some sections of coral appear fragile, like they might crumble under a touch. Yet inside, dense skeletons support them. Ancient branches provide scaffolding, holding delicate structures in place. Tiny organisms move through these hidden corridors, feeding, hiding, and reproducing. Juvenile fish seek shelter in crevices formed by layers of growth stacked over decades. The past forms the architecture that shapes life today. Without the old coral skeletons, the reef could not support the communities it does. In calm lagoons, coral grows slowly over centuries. Each thin branch extends upward while below, older growth compacts into stone. Sediments settle in pockets, further preserving history. Algae and microbes colonize these layers, continuing cycles of life even on ancient foundations. The reef's memory is active. It is not static. Past and present interact continuously. New polyps respond to structures built long before their time, following patterns embedded in the stone. Storms leave marks that are preserved in time layers. Broken branches pile up, forming new platforms. Coral fragments settle and fuse into skeletons. The next generation grows around these remnants, forming shapes influenced by forces long past. The reef records these events silently. Every storm, every flood, every strong wave leaves its mark. Life continues, but the past is never erased. Each layer tells a story, a quiet reminder that the ocean has always been in motion, even when the surface appears still. In some areas, corals survive where the water temperature fluctuates drastically. The old skeletons beneath them reveal decades of survival strategies. They show how polyps adapted to warming or cooling trends. These structures guide new growth, forming channels and ridges that stabilize colonies during future changes. The reef is both archive and blueprint. It preserves knowledge without anyone noticing. The past is always beneath, shaping the present in ways invisible from above. Chemical traces locked in coral stone reveal even more. Isotopes of oxygen and carbon, trapped within layers, record seasonal and annual shifts. Nutrient availability, salinity, and growth rates are all stored in these microscopic patterns. Scientists can read these subtle codes to reconstruct the ocean's history. Every layer is a page, every ridge a paragraph, every plateau a chapter. The reef tells a story that is much longer than human history, stretching back beyond cities, empires, and civilizations. Ancient reefs form the foundation for modern ecosystems. Fish, invertebrates, and algae rely on old structures for survival. Crevices formed centuries ago become nurseries for tiny creatures. Ridges carved by previous generations guide water flow, concentrating nutrients and plankton where polyps feed most efficiently. Even storms that break the top layers do not erase the memory beneath. The reef is always built on its past, and life adapts to that architecture. Some reefs reveal time in startling ways. Coral plates grow over rock that formed millions of years ago. Fossils embedded in the base record life long vanished. Tiny polyps occupy surfaces that have supported life through ice ages, tectonic shifts, and sea level changes. The reef is a bridge between eras. Each living polyp is connected to generations that survived extremes far beyond human experience. It is a reminder that the ocean has a memory older and wiser than we are. Reef communities are layered in life as well as in stone. Algae cover old skeletons, microbes colonize hidden chambers, and juvenile fish explore the labyrinth of past growth. Tiny creatures graze on surfaces formed decades ago. Even when we see only the top layer, the reef beneath is alive with history. The past supports the present, sustaining life while remaining hidden. Time layers create stability, structure, and complexity that nothing in the shallow water could manage alone. Some coral skeletons reveal ancient rivalries. Competing species that once dominated a zone are preserved beneath new growth. Their remnants form ridges, tunnels, and protective walls. Current coral grows around them, adapting to shapes left behind. Life continues, yet the ghosts of previous inhabitants shape the reef. It is as if the ocean remembers every competition, every struggle, every survival. The reef does not forget. Even the tiniest polyps are guided by time layers. When they grow, they extend along old ridges and into gaps formed long ago. Branches interlock with skeletons from centuries past. The shape of the colony is influenced by what came before. Polyps respond to patterns they did not create, yet those patterns determine feeding efficiency, water flow, and protection. The reef is a living archive, instructing new life through structure alone. Sediment settles in pockets, preserving small events like floods or landslides. These layers are absorbed into the coral, becoming part of the reef's memory. Tiny creatures continue to inhabit these zones, extracting nutrients from sediments and skeleton alike. Algae colonize surfaces formed hundreds of years prior. Energy moves along structures built long ago, connecting present life to ancient foundations. Time layers also record human influence. Changes in water quality, temperature, and currents leave subtle traces in skeletons. Over decades, these signals accumulate, forming a timeline that scientists can interpret. The reef quietly stores these histories without pause, absorbing impact and continuing to function. It is patient, persistent, and precise. The past and present coexist in a delicate balance, visible only to those who look closely. The reef's memory shapes behavior as well. Juvenile fish use crevices formed centuries ago for shelter. Algae grows in channels created by storms hundreds of years prior. Polyps extend tentacles in ways dictated by ridges laid down long ago. Even invisible microbes follow the paths created by time. Life unfolds on a foundation that no one designed consciously, yet it is perfectly adapted. The reef uses its history to sustain itself. Ancient skeletons also protect against change. They stabilize sediment, absorb wave energy, and maintain tunnels for water flow. Coral grows on top of these structures, strengthening them further. Each generation contributes to the memory of the reef, reinforcing its ability to survive. Life does not erase the past, it builds upon it. The reef is a system where time accumulates, stacking layer upon layer until the present can thrive safely. Every ridge, channel, and hollow holds a story. The reef's memory is written in stone and life, chemical traces and skeletal forms. Polyps, algae, fish, and microbes interact with these layers as if reading a book that spans centuries. Growth, survival, and adaptation all follow patterns set long ago. The past exists quietly, shaping what happens today. It influences feeding, shelter, reproduction, and protection. The reef remembers oceans that no longer exist, yet continues to live, to grow, and to teach silently. When the sun dips below the horizon, the reef does not sleep. Light fades, but the system beneath the water shifts into another rhythm. Day creatures retreat into hidden shelters. Nocturnal animals awaken. Tiny polyps extend their tentacles, capturing particles that were missed during the day. Mucus sheets spread across coral surfaces, collecting microscopic food carried in the water. The reef seems quiet, yet energy moves in subtle ways. The processes of life continue, hidden in darkness, invisible to any observer who assumes stillness. Bioluminescence begins to pulse through the water. Small flashes flicker across branches, like distant stars mirrored beneath the sea. Tiny worms release light when touched. Crustaceans flash unexpectedly, confusing predators. Even some fish emit gentle glows along their fins and bodies. The reef transforms into a nighttime landscape that is alive in ways daylight cannot reveal. Each flicker is a message, a signal, or a warning. Life communicates with movement and light where sight and sound alone are not enough. Some fish and invertebrates shift their feeding patterns at night. Plankton, which floated quietly during the day, becomes active as currents change. Coral polyps capture particles with mucus, but so do sponges, filter feeding on water that flows through hidden chambers. Streams of energy move silently across the reef. Tiny creatures consume what is left over, recycling nutrients while appearing motionless. Feeding occurs where nothing seems to move. Darkness activates a layer of life that is completely separate from the day, yet dependent on the same architecture. Sound travels differently in darkness. Tiny clicks and snaps pass through coral branches. Shrimp snap their claws to stun prey. Fish scrape surfaces or shift rocks, creating vibrations. Even currents passing over ridges create low hums that carry information across small distances. The reef listens in ways that humans rarely notice. Animals interpret these vibrations, responding to threats or opportunities. A reef in darkness is alive with signals, conversations, and unseen interactions. Mucus sheets perform essential tasks while most animals rest. Polyps secrete layers that trap carbon particles and plankton. Currents carry these sheets gently across the colony. Coral absorbs nutrients from the trapped material before releasing the remainder. This feeding is precise and silent. The mucus protects surfaces from sediment while simultaneously providing extra sustenance. Nighttime feeding ensures that the colony continues to grow and thrive, even when sunlight no longer fuels the algae beneath the coral tissue. Some species specialize in nighttime activity. Shrimp emerge from hidden crevices to graze on algae and detritus. Small fish hunt in shadows where predators are less active. Crabs scuttle along ridges, cleaning surfaces and turning sediments. Each movement, though small, contributes to energy flow across the reef. Darkness reveals a different hierarchy of life. Animals that might be dominated during the day take center stage at night. Predators and prey move with stealth, guided by instincts and subtle environmental cues. Bioluminescent signals are more than decoration. They serve to warn, attract, or confuse. A worm flicks a small pulse when a predator passes, startling it. Juvenile fish emit faint glows to signal position to parents or siblings. Algae sometimes glow faintly, reflecting light in ways that protect delicate coral surfaces. The reef becomes a network of illumination, each point telling a story that may last only a few seconds. Yet these brief flashes influence survival and feeding for countless creatures. Darkness is not passive. It is a mode of action, a system operating in parallel to the daytime rhythm. Many organisms time their reproductive cycles with night. Coral releases gametes under specific moon phases, sending chemical signals into the water. Fish and invertebrates spawn in synchrony, ensuring that young have the highest chance of survival. Channels cut into reefs by tides and currents carry these particles to safe areas. Darkness provides cover for these events, hiding tiny forms from predators. Life in the reef is not random. It is coordinated, predictable in ways that seem mysterious to an outside observer. Some nocturnal predators rely on stealth rather than speed. Moray eels emerge from hidden tunnels, sensing vibrations and chemical cues. Rays glide over sandy patches, detecting prey beneath the surface. Crustaceans hunt in thickets of coral branches, using shadows to conceal motion. The balance of power shifts. What was safe by day may become dangerous by night. The reef operates like a machine that switches gears, transforming the behavior of all its inhabitants without pausing. The structure of the reef enhances nighttime activity. Ridges redirect currents, channeling plankton to areas where polyps can capture it efficiently. Crevices provide shelter while still allowing predators to move unseen. Overhanging plates protect smaller species, while the larger colony continues to feed. Coral architecture that seems static during the day becomes a network of pathways and hunting grounds at night. Darkness amplifies the subtle mechanics already built into the reef. Microbial life also shifts at night. Bacteria that recycle nutrients become more active. They break down waste, releasing compounds that algae and coral absorb. Tiny processes, invisible to human eyes, maintain chemical balance. Every particle captured or released continues the reef cycles. Nighttime metabolism is as critical as daytime growth. The reef does not sleep. It reallocates energy, cycling nutrients through layers of living tissue and hidden chambers. Some fish use bioluminescent cues to navigate complex coral structures. Tiny lights help them avoid collisions and find feeding zones. Small signals allow juveniles to stay close to protective branches while parents patrol nearby areas. Light at night is not constant. It flickers, pulses, and shifts with movement. Each pulse influences behavior, guiding predators, prey, and symbiotic species alike. The reef's architecture works with light to create a map invisible to the casual observer. Even sediment movement continues in darkness. Currents carry fine particles through tunnels and channels. Polyps filter these particles with their tentacles or mucus layers. Algae and microbes feed, grow, and spread. Energy circulates along invisible pathways. Nighttime is not quiet. It is active in subtle, coordinated ways. Predators, prey, and microscopic life operate simultaneously, forming a web that is maintained without a single command. Reefs near moonlit waters display patterns of light and shadow that further influence behavior. Crabs and shrimp emerge in bright areas or retreat to shadows. Juvenile fish take advantage of reflected light to locate safe zones. Polyps extend toward illuminated surfaces, increasing feeding efficiency. Even the smallest organisms are guided by lunar and tidal rhythms. Darkness becomes a signal, not a pause. It orchestrates complex interactions across multiple layers of life. Some nocturnal processes have long-term effects. Nighttime feeding influences growth rates, reproductive success, and the distribution of species. Mucus sheets deposited at night add nutrients to coral tissue, affecting expansion in the morning. Bioluminescent displays can mislead predators, improving survival odds for young fish. The unseen work of night ensures that the reef remains productive, resilient, and coordinated. Darkness is a tool, not an absence. Noise at night is also part of the system. Vibrations pass through water and coral skeletons. Fish and crustaceans respond to subtle cues. Polyps retract or extend, sensing threats or opportunities. Even microbes may react to chemical or mechanical signals. The reef communicates in ways impossible to detect without careful observation. The nighttime system is just as intricate and essential as the daytime one, yet entirely different in rhythm and appearance. By the end of the night, energy has circulated, nutrients have moved, and species have interacted in ways that will not repeat exactly by day. The reef switches modes seamlessly. Each layer of life is engaged, from the smallest microbe to the largest predator. The coral tissue, mucus sheets, and hidden chambers all participate. Darkness is not an interruption. It is a transformation, a secret cycle operating while humans watch only the surface. The reef never pauses, it only changes form. The reef is never random. Every ridge, every channel, every passage has a purpose, even if no one designed it consciously. Water moves through these corridors in patterns that seem invisible to an outside observer. Currents find the paths of least resistance, weaving around coral plates, through ridges and under tunnels. These currents carry more than water. They carry life. Tiny larvae, small fish, and plankton follow these routes without knowing why, guided by the unseen architecture of the reef. Nothing here wanders by accident. Every motion is influenced by the shapes and structures formed over centuries. Sharks and larger predators use the same paths. They patrol the corridors, moving along channels carved naturally by coral growth and erosion. Their migrations are precise. They enter a pass at the same time each season, sometimes crossing the same route as previous generations. Currents, tides, and reef formations create predictable highways. The reef acts as a map, directing movement without a single signpost. Fish follow, avoiding danger and finding food along these routes. The structure of the reef determines where life flows. Even the smallest creatures use this system. Larvae released from distant reefs are carried along narrow channels, pulled toward new habitats. Their journey is long and the ocean is vast, but the reef provides direction. Tiny forms sense chemical cues, changes in water flow, and light filtered through the coral to guide them. Survival depends on following these invisible maps. Those who do not navigate successfully fail to find shelter or food. The architecture of the reef ensures that movement is never random. Even life too small to see is shaped by structure. Passes through atolls act like gates. Circular reefs often enclose lagoons, leaving openings that connect to the open ocean. These gates determine how water enters and exits, controlling flow, oxygen levels, and nutrient distribution. Large schools of fish follow the currents into these passages, using them as shortcuts during migration. Predators wait near these narrow channels, knowing that prey will pass predictably. The reef channels both opportunity and danger with exacting precision. Even young juveniles learn to use the same routes instinctively, following currents guided by the reef's design. The reef influences daily movement as well. Tides rise and fall, pushing water through narrow corridors. Fish move with the flow, positioning themselves to feed on the particles carried past them. Coral polyps extend tentacles at the right time to catch passing plankton. Crustaceans scuttle along branches, timing their hunting to the rhythm of moving water. The reef structure organizes activity on both small and large scales. What seems chaotic is actually choreographed by the geometry of coral growth. Every ridge, every tunnel, every channel has a role in guiding energy and life. Larvae of different species often follow the same routes but arrive at different destinations. Some settle in sheltered lagoons, finding crevices to hide. Others attach to high ridges where currents bring constant food. Their choices are limited by the reef's form, yet each is free to find a suitable niche. The coral does not direct them consciously, yet its structure becomes a silent guide. Movement in the reef is not aimless. It is constrained, shaped, and predicted by physical architecture. Even predators depend on these routes. Sharks, rays, and larger fish follow channels during hunts. They exploit the predictable flow of prey along passes and corridors. Ambush points form naturally where ridges funnel fish into narrow areas. Currents and structure create hunting maps. Predators who ignore these routes risk missing food. The reef is not merely a home. It is a guide that dictates where movement can occur safely and efficiently. Nothing wanders without purpose here. The map extends across generations. Adult fish pass along learned routes to their young. Juveniles memorize corridors, channels, and openings. The reef teaches them where to hide, where to feed, and where to swim safely. Seasonal migration patterns reinforce these lessons. Chemical cues from coral and algae mark territory boundaries and safe passages. Currents carry signals that larvae detect, ensuring that each generation follows paths similar to the last. The reef functions as a memory system, storing navigation instructions in its very form. Even the smallest microhabitats affect movement. Tiny crevices, overhangs, and channels between branches create obstacles and opportunities. Juvenile fish use these spaces for shelter, learning to move efficiently through the reef. Small crustaceans navigate tight tunnels, timing their activity with currents that carry plankton. These microroutes are as important as larger channels. Life is guided through layers of passageways that vary in size and function. Every organism interacts with these routes according to its needs and abilities. Spawning events are synchronized with reef passages. Coral gametes, fish eggs, and larvae are released in waves. Currents shaped by coral formations carry them to safe zones or to areas where survival is more likely. Reef gates act like protective funnels, directing life through paths that maximize safety and resources. Those that do not follow these pathways fail to settle, illustrating that movement without guidance carries risk. Structure dictates not just survival but opportunity. The reef is a living map, connecting habitats across space and time. Even debris follows patterns. Fallen branches, sand, and organic material are moved predictably by tides and currents shaped by the reef. Nutrients accumulate in pockets where water slows, feeding algae, sponges, and coral polyps. Channels funnel particles to areas where small creatures can capture them. Energy circulates as predictably as water itself. Movement is not random. It is constrained by form, creating zones of safety, feeding, and interaction. Predators, prey, and neutral species learn to interpret these patterns. Juveniles hide along predictable edges, avoiding fast currents and open zones where larger fish hunt. Crustaceans wait at edges to catch plankton funneled by the reef. Fish patrol boundaries that mark safe zones created by coral ridges. Currents and structure together dictate behavior. The reef itself becomes a silent guide, directing movement without a word or thought. Life moves as if reading a map drawn in stone and water. Even large migrations follow the reef's design. Schools of fish move between lagoons and open ocean using passes. Juvenile sharks follow seasonal patterns through narrow corridors. Rays glide along predictable routes toward feeding grounds. Each movement depends on openings, ridges, and channels. Even the ocean beyond the reef is influenced by its form. The reef extends its map outward, shaping where creatures travel over long distances. Currents carry signals too. Chemical cues released by coral, algae, and other organisms spread along channels. Larvae detect these signals and adjust movement. Predators detect the same chemicals, anticipating prey. The reef communicates through water, using structure as a conduit. Navigation, feeding, and protection are all connected to these invisible signals. Nothing moves without influence from the system. Even when storms rearrange sediment or branches, the overall map remains. Channels may shift slightly, but the paths of flow persist. Life adapts quickly to altered routes. Larvae still find new habitats. Fish continue to use predictable corridors. Predators and prey adjust their hunting and hiding strategies. The reef map is resilient, maintaining function even under pressure. Structure guides life through change. At night, some passages carry bioluminescent signals along the corridors. Small fish follow glowing trails. Larvae sense faint flashes and adjust direction. Currents move light in patterns that overlap with water flow, reinforcing the invisible map. Life interacts with both structure and illumination, navigating through a system that humans barely notice. The reef's map is layered, combining architecture, flow, and light into guidance for all creatures. The reef teaches one clear lesson: nothing moves here by accident. Every organism, from the smallest larvae to the largest predator, follows paths carved by coral growth, water movement, and long-term processes. Currents and channels are more than physical structures. They are maps of survival, guides to feeding, reproduction, and safety. Life flows through these invisible routes as naturally as blood through veins. The reef itself directs, shapes, and remembers every movement. Even when no one watches, patterns emerge. Fish, larvae, and invertebrates follow the routes created by coral architecture. Currents carry nutrients and signals along these paths. Predators patrol predictable corridors. Spawning events use passes as gateways. The reef is alive, but alive as a map that directs everything that passes through it. Movement here is intentional, even when unintentional. Nothing wanders by accident. The reef is a machine for navigation as much as for life. Its channels, passes, and corridors shape where energy flows, where creatures feed, and where young survive. Every ridge and tunnel is part of a larger system, one that extends across reefs, lagoons, and open ocean. Even distant offspring follow these patterns, connecting generations through invisible highways. Life is guided, structured, and directed without a conscious hand. The reef itself is the map, and everything within it follows, consciously or not. The reef is full of tiny crevices, hidden spaces where sunlight barely reaches. These are not just empty cracks. They are nurseries. They are shelters for the smallest lives that have just begun. Juveniles enter these narrow spaces the moment they hatch. Their world is measured in millimeters, the difference between safety and being swept away. These gaps decide who lives and who does not. Every small shadow matters. Every corner becomes a sanctuary. Most lives survive only because something else left a gap. A tiny fish egg hatches into a translucent larva. It swims weakly at first, searching for cover. One small crevice, formed by coral growth or an eroded ridge, becomes its entire universe. It cannot leave. It hides from predators that pass overhead, from currents that might toss it into open water. The crevice offers a constant flow of microscopic food carried by the tides, yet it is narrow enough that larger animals cannot enter. Here, life begins not with freedom, but with limitation. Every survival is a story of finding the perfect space. Shrimp larvae find similar refuge. They squeeze between branches or settle under overhangs. Their tiny bodies fit perfectly where other creatures cannot reach. In these microhabitats, they feed, grow, and molt without fear. A single branch might hold dozens of juveniles of different species. Each one takes advantage of space left by another, a living puzzle of survival. The reef is a library of gaps. Each crack tells a story of who came first, who survived, and how space shapes life. Even coral polyps play a role. When they grow, they create spaces unintentionally. Branches rise, plates extend, and tunnels form. The gaps left between these structures become crucial nurseries. Juvenile fish, crabs, and shrimps recognize these openings. They settle quickly. No parent guides them. The structure itself becomes the caretaker. The reef does not plan, yet it provides shelter. The smallest lives navigate a world shaped by forces much larger than themselves. Tiny sea stars and brittle stars use cracks too. They hide within the nooks, extending their arms to catch passing plankton while remaining protected. Small crabs grip the surfaces of overhangs, moving cautiously, only venturing out to gather food. Every millimeter of space matters. The slightest difference in size can determine if a juvenile survives its first week. Gaps are not accidental. They are the foundation of life. Even creatures that will one day grow larger depend on the leftover space of others. Predation shapes these nurseries as well. Juveniles hide because danger exists everywhere. Predators patrol open areas. Larger fish, eels, and crabs hunt along reef edges, looking for meals that cannot hide. But the crevices offer safety. Narrow tunnels prevent access. Overhangs cast shadows that obscure movement. The reef itself becomes a shield. Life survives not by fighting, but by finding space others cannot reach. The reef quietly decides who lives through its structure alone. These microhabitats are dynamic. Water moves through them, carrying food and oxygen. Currents swirl around branches, creating small pockets of calmer water. Larvae settle where the flow is gentle enough to allow feeding, but strong enough to deliver nutrients. Even the smallest shifts in water speed can affect survival. Life measures every movement. The reef, without effort, organizes a system where the tiniest organisms can thrive. Gaps are not passive. They are living shelters shaped by the interaction of water, light, and coral growth. Coral overhangs protect from sunlight as well. Some juvenile creatures are sensitive to bright light, which exposes them to predators. A narrow shadow becomes critical. Small fish rest in shaded pockets during the day, emerging at night to feed when light is low. Tiny crabs and shrimp hide during strong currents, retreating into cracks that seem insignificant. Each gap is a miniature world, a room in a house built by forces far larger than the animals themselves. The reef's architecture dictates behavior even before life knows it exists. Even sediment helps. Sand settles in lower parts of the reef, creating soft beds within cracks. Some larvae rest there, using it as camouflage against predators. Tiny worms burrow within these sand-filled spaces, adding stability and aeration. Each gap becomes a microcosm of interactions. A single crevice can host multiple species, each occupying a different layer. The survival of one depends on the presence of another. The reef operates like an invisible hand, shaping life through space and structure rather than action. Juvenile fish learn the value of these gaps quickly. A small snapper finds its first shelter among tightly packed branches. It tests the limits, moving in and out carefully. Each movement teaches it where to hide and where it is vulnerable. The reef is a teacher without words. Gaps act as classrooms, instructing life in survival, feeding, and movement. Those who fail to find the right space perish. Life itself becomes a story of navigating openings left by others. Even adult animals reinforce these gaps. Some species defend their shelters or territories around crevices. They chase intruders, protect eggs, and guard juveniles. Their presence ensures that openings remain safe for smaller creatures. The reef structure interacts with behavior, guiding life through subtle protection. Survival becomes a combination of space, timing, and awareness. Gaps created by growth and erosion influence generations of organisms. The importance of tiny gaps extends to reproduction. Juveniles that survive within crevices grow to reproduce, often returning to the same type of shelter for their young. Life repeats itself inside the same cracks, generations learning to fit within the architecture of the reef. The reef creates a continuous cycle. Every opening matters. Every shadow has a purpose. Survival is dictated by the smallest measures, and life continues because some spaces exist purely by chance. Even nocturnal creatures rely on these shelters. At night, currents come in small crevices, allowing vulnerable juveniles to explore just enough to feed. Tiny bioluminescent organisms provide faint light, guiding movements. The reef structure creates pathways and pockets where life can function safely in darkness. Gaps are both refuge and root, shaping activity without ever being noticed. Predator-prey dynamics are apparent at this scale. Juveniles hiding in cracks avoid detection, while predators search open areas. The reef's form enforces these rules. Some gaps act as escape routes. Others act as feeding stations where currents bring plankton directly to the opening. Life survives through a balance of architecture and instinct. Nothing is random. The reef quietly controls opportunity and risk through its tiny spaces. Even when storms rearrange branches or sediment fills openings, new gaps form immediately. Coral growth and broken structures create fresh shelters for the next generation. The cycle never stops. Space is constantly reshaped, yet life continues to find refuge. The reef's architecture is resilient, ensuring that survival depends on more than chance. It depends on structure, gaps, and timing. Life's beginning is fragile. A juvenile fish, a tiny shrimp, or a newly settled coral polyp must find a gap to survive. The difference of a few millimeters can determine fate. The reef is a silent architect, leaving space, shadows, and tunnels for life to exploit. Survival depends on noticing what is available, fitting into it, and growing with it. Most lives endure only because something else left room. Even as adults, many creatures return to these gaps. They act as safe zones during storms, feeding grounds, or resting areas. The reef continues to shape life through the spaces it provides. Crevices, tunnels, and cracks are not just physical structures. They are lifelines. Every life begins with space, and the reef gives it freely, without awareness. The smallest openings dictate the largest outcomes. The reef teaches a quiet truth. Survival often depends on what already exists. Most creatures are never free to wander in open space safely. They rely on structures, gaps, and shadows left behind by growth, erosion, or the activity of other species. Life begins inside cracks, and in these tiny spaces, the future of the reef is decided. Nothing happens by accident. Every opening is an opportunity, and every millimeter matters. The reef is alive in ways we cannot see. Tiny worlds exist inside it, hidden from the casual observer. Sponges pump water through their porous bodies, creating streams that carry food and oxygen. Microbes cling to surfaces and live inside tissues, too small to notice without a microscope. Algae grow in patches, capturing sunlight, then storing it or changing energy paths when light fades. Life here is a network of invisible activity. Each organism has a role, even if it seems still. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repurposed. Sponges act like silent factories. Water enters through tiny openings, bringing organic particles. The sponge filters out what it needs, feeding itself, but the leftover matter does not vanish. Microbes consume it, breaking it down into nutrients usable by algae or other small creatures. One layer feeds another. Nothing leaves without being used. The reef is a closed loop, a system that reclaims, recycles, and repurposes endlessly. Energy passes through countless hands, or tentacles, or cells, yet it never disappears. Microbes communicate in chemical whispers. They release substances that trigger responses in other organisms. One group breaks down nitrogen, another processes carbon. Algae respond by adjusting pigment levels or storing energy for darker days. Tiny crustaceans feed on detritus, creating more waste that is broken down again. The cycle is complex and precise. Each chemical signal ensures balance. Life continues because the reef remembers how to recycle. Nothing here disappears. Everything has a second life. Algae are not passive either. When sunlight is strong, they grow rapidly, capturing energy to share with their coral partners. When light fades or the water clouds, they switch modes. Stored compounds are used, pigments rearranged, energy rerouted. They sustain themselves and the reef even in darkness. The reef does not pause for the night. The algae adapt, adjust, and continue to feed others. Life here moves silently, without chasing, without noise, yet energy continues its journey. Coral polyps participate in this hidden network. They capture tiny plankton, consume carbon particles in mucus, and host algae in their tissues. Waste from their digestion is not lost. Microbes consume it, converting it into nutrients that return to the coral or drift into nearby sponges and algae. The reef operates like a machine, each part feeding another. Nothing is truly separate. Every fragment, every particle has a purpose. Life here exists in layers, with invisible exchanges sustaining everything visible. Even detritus plays a role. Particles of sand, broken coral, or leftover food settle in cracks and crevices. Tiny worms, bacteria, and algae colonize these deposits, breaking them down. They become fuel for sponges or nutrients for coral. The reef thrives because even decay is useful. It is never waste. Life here is built on the principle that one creature's output becomes another's input. The ecosystem functions without pause, recycling endlessly. Chemical conversations guide more than feeding. They influence growth, reproduction, and behavior. When a polyp detects a predator, it releases substances that signal neighbors to respond. Microbes adjust, producing compounds that strengthen coral defenses. Algae may change pigment levels or release antioxidants. Tiny fish sense changes in water chemistry, hiding or feeding accordingly. The reef is alive with messages, subtle and unseen. Every interaction carries information that shapes survival. Sponges and microbes create hidden refuges. As water passes through sponges, tiny chambers collect detritus. Bacteria flourish inside these chambers, digesting organic material and producing nutrients. Algae growing nearby absorb these compounds. Coral polyps take in plankton that has passed through these microprocessors. Life is intertwined on a microscopic level, yet the effects shape the entire reef. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repurposed. The reef adjusts to changing conditions without planning. If a storm deposits extra sediment, microbes and sponges process the new material. Algae shift energy use to compensate for reduced light. Coral polyps adapt, altering feeding behavior. Life continues seamlessly, turning disruption into opportunity. The reef's hidden systems operate silently, invisible engines maintaining balance. Energy is never idle. It moves, circulates, and transforms constantly. Even the smallest algae have strategies. Some float freely in the water column for a time, then attach to surfaces. They grow where light is abundant, but when it changes, they adjust internally. Pigments are redistributed, compounds stored or used differently. Their energy supports coral, sponges, and tiny invertebrates. The reef works because these microworlds function in unison. Nothing here is random. Every action, even unseen, feeds something else. Microbes form specialized niches across the reef. Some occupy coral surfaces, others live within sponges, and some inhabit algae. Each group handles specific tasks. One breaks down nitrogen, another recycles carbon, and yet another produces compounds that prevent harmful microbes from spreading. Together, they create stability. The reef's productivity depends on these hidden actors. Without them, energy would leak away, life would slow, and survival would falter. Every particle is accounted for. Small crustaceans contribute too. They feed on organic particles, excrete material that microbes consume, and in turn create nutrients for algae. Tiny worms tunnel through sediment, stirring it so oxygen penetrates and nutrients circulate. Even what seems like random movement supports the closed loop. Every creature is part of a larger plan that exists without thought. Energy passes from one to another, reshaped and reused. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repurposed. Coral mucus plays a hidden role. It captures particles, detritus, and plankton. Some is absorbed, some moves to neighboring organisms. Microbes consume leftovers. Tiny crustaceans graze on the surface, spreading nutrients. Algae nearby benefit. Coral polyps feed. Every action is interconnected. The reef functions like a closed loop. Every particle, every droplet of energy finds a path to feed another. Life here is silent but relentless. Even at night, the process continues. Bioluminescent microbes glow faintly. Tiny creatures feed on particles illuminated by these flashes. Sponges continue pumping water. Algae switch energy sources. Coral polyps extend tentacles to capture passing food. Nothing sleeps. The reef does not pause. Energy flows invisibly, transforming from one form to another. Every resource is used, every output recycled. The reef survives extremes because of these hidden worlds. In low light, low nutrient or turbulent conditions, sponges, microbes, and algae adjust. They repurpose energy efficiently, maintaining life when conditions seem harsh. The system is robust because it uses everything. Nothing is wasted. Every particle, every fragment of energy contributes to sustaining life. The reef is resilient, thriving because it is a network of microworlds within worlds. Even large-scale changes are absorbed. Storms, temperature fluctuations, or shifts in currents are integrated into these microprocesses. Coral, algae, and microbes adjust instantly. Nutrients are redistributed. Tiny animals find new shelters. Energy moves differently but continues moving. The reef functions as a seamless whole, powered by countless hidden interactions. Life survives because everything is repurposed. The reef is a lesson in efficiency. Each tiny organism, from microbes to algae to small crustaceans, contributes to the invisible web. Chemical signals, energy conversions, nutrient recycling, and hidden shelters maintain stability. Nothing leaves. Nothing is lost. Everything is repurposed, reused, and reshaped. The reef's productivity is a quiet miracle, invisible to most eyes but vital for every visible creature that lives above it. Even in plain sight, this closed loop governs all activity. Juvenile fish feeding on plankton, sponges filtering water, coral polyps extending tentacles, algae capturing sunlight, all are part of the same cycle. Energy passes from one form to another seamlessly. Waste becomes fuel. Decay becomes growth. Each organism is a node in a vast network, invisible yet powerful. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repurposed. The reef continues endlessly, cycling energy, recycling nutrients, and sustaining life through microworlds. Invisible currents carry food from one group to another. Chemical messages coordinate action across species. Microbes break down particles. Sponges circulate water. Algae adjust to light. Coral feeds. Tiny animals navigate the labyrinth of hidden chambers. Life persists because every fragment of energy, every particle, every molecule has a purpose. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repurposed. In this world, even the smallest creatures matter. Each contributes to the reef's closed loop. Life is not random. Every action feeds another. The reef functions as a seamless machine, invisible in its workings but obvious in its results. Productivity never stops. Energy is never idle. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repurposed. Every particle counts. Every interaction matters. The reef survives because it reuses what is available, and in doing so, it sustains life on an unimaginable scale. Even as your attention moves away, the reef continues. Nothing stops when eyes leave. Tiny currents keep flowing through coral branches, carrying food particles to unseen mouths. Microbes break down matter, algae shift energy, sponges pump water. Every system remains active, operating silently without anyone watching. Life repeats in quiet cycles that do not need observation. The reef is not a scene to be viewed. It is a process that persists on its own. The light changes, but activity does not pause. Sunlight flickers through waves, creating moving patterns across coral surfaces. Polyps extend tentacles, capturing plankton as it passes. Small fish move among branches, exploring spaces they have always known. Even when no human looks, every movement matters. Currents redirect nutrients. Mucus layers trap particles. Energy transfers from one organism to another. Life continues because it does not rely on attention. Storms arrive and depart without warning. Waves break against outer ridges, scattering fragments of coral and sediment. Some pieces are carried away, some settle in new spots. Coral tissues spread over damaged surfaces, rebuilding structures that were once broken. Sponges continue filtering water. Algae capture sunlight and adjust to reduced illumination. Microbes recycle what is left. Destruction does not stop the reef. It reshapes it, feeding the next phase of growth. The reef is never finished. It never closes a chapter. Even nighttime does not pause the processes. Bioluminescent organisms flash tiny lights, revealing movement in the darkness. Small fish feed on particles carried by subtle currents. Mucus sheets continue to trap carbon and plankton. Sponges push water through intricate canals, circulating oxygen and nutrients. Chemical messages pass between organisms, alerting neighbors to predators or changes in environment. Every action continues, repeating cycles that started long before any observer arrived. Life hides in cracks and crevices, unnoticed but alive. Juvenile fish shelter where light barely reaches. Tiny invertebrates crawl through hidden channels. Sponges house entire microcosms. Algae grow in niches unseen. Microbes convert waste into fuel. The reef operates as a network of hidden worlds. Each world feeds another. The system functions because every part interacts with others. Nothing waits for someone to watch. The reef's work is constant, independent, eternal. Energy flows without interruption. Plankton clouds move through open water, entering the labyrinth of branches and plates. Polyps catch food without moving far. Crustaceans graze, excrete, and create nutrients. Algae store energy, then release it when conditions shift. Microbes process waste into forms usable for others. Currents push particles into hidden channels. Nothing is idle. Every transfer contributes to a larger cycle. The reef continues its work because it has no end, no pause, no conclusion. Even changes in environment are absorbed seamlessly. If water warms or cools, corals adjust internal temperature. Algae shift pigments. Microbes alter their activity. Sponges keep circulating water. Tiny animals move to safer zones. Processes adapt without thought. Energy continues to flow. Particles circulate endlessly. Nothing in the reef stops because the story pauses. Life does not depend on an audience. It persists on its own rhythm, invisible yet unstoppable. Small details shape the reef's persistence. Raised coral rims create calm zones, sheltering polyps while currents move around them. Channels funnel tides, distributing oxygen and nutrients deep into the reef. Tiny snails farm algae, maintaining patches that feed themselves and others. Juveniles survive in the smallest spaces left between branches. Each small action contributes to a system that continues without interruption. Even when humans leave, the reef operates with perfect efficiency. Chemical communication continues invisibly. Polyps release signals to warn neighbors of threats, adjust feeding, or coordinate growth. Microbes respond by producing compounds that balance the environment. Algae shift energy pathways. Tiny animals sense changes and adjust positions. Everything is connected. Nothing stops because attention is absent. The reef behaves like a living organism, performing tasks that have no beginning and no end. Even waste is never lost. Organic particles fall to the seafloor, settle in crevices, or pass through sponges. Microbes consume them, turning them into compounds for algae or coral. Tiny crustaceans redistribute nutrients, creating new fuel for others. Energy cycles continuously. What seems like decay is only transformation. Every fragment serves a purpose. Life in the reef relies on this constant flow. Nothing disappears. Everything is reused. Storms, tidal surges, and lunar cycles shape movement, but do not stop the reef. Coral fragments settle and form new colonies. Currents deliver plankton to waiting mouths. Microbes process particles, algae adjust energy, and polyps continue feeding. Night follows day, light fades, but the system persists. No matter how many changes occur, the reef adapts, transforms, and continues. Processes repeat, unseen yet vital, proving that life does not require spectators. Even ancient structures remain alive. Skeletons of past corals form the foundation for new growth. Layers of stone house tiny organisms. Algae grow in crevices. Microbes flourish where currents circulate. The reef builds upon itself, stacking history beneath the present. Every generation contributes to the next. Energy passes from old to new. Life continues because the reef never stops. Each layer, each organism, each particle is part of a cycle that repeats endlessly. The reef's complexity ensures persistence. Branches create passageways, plates form shelter, ridges deflect waves. Juveniles use hidden spaces, fish follow predictable paths, algae respond to light shifts. Currents deliver particles to where they are needed. Mucus traps food. Microbes recycle. Sponges pump. Everything functions in unison. No observer is needed. The reef continues its work regardless of human presence. Life carries on, repeating cycles that have existed for centuries. Even the smallest creatures contribute to continuity. Microbes digest waste, algae store energy, sponges circulate water, polyps feed. Tiny crustaceans move nutrients. Juveniles hide in crevices. Every particle matters. Nothing is wasted. Energy flows from one part of the reef to another, invisible yet essential. Life continues because the system never stops, repeating processes over and over, long after attention has left. The reef does not wait for understanding. Scientific study, observation, even curiosity, it does not need them. Coral, algae, microbes, sponges, and animals continue their work. Energy is captured, recycled, redistributed. Life begins, continues, and ends within the loops of unseen systems. Nothing pauses for a story. Nothing halts for comprehension. The reef persists because it is independent, self-sustaining, and eternal in its motions. Even in quiet moments, the reef pulses with unseen activity. Mucus layers trap particles. Microbes process them. Algae adjust pigments. Coral polyps extend and retract. Juveniles feed. Currents move nutrients. The system repeats endlessly. No one is watching, and it does not matter. The reef operates beyond observation. Every cycle, every action, every transfer of energy is part of a process that has no final point. By the time you leave, the reef has already moved through countless cycles. Particles have changed hands many times. Tiny creatures have fed and hidden. Algae have shifted energy. Polyps have captured plankton. Microbes have recycled. Storms have come and gone. Skeletons have been built upon, and currents continue to pulse. The system operates as if attention never existed. The reef continues its work because it is alive, independent, and timeless. The reef exists in perpetual motion. Energy flows, organisms interact, nutrients cycle, and life persists. Processes repeat without pause. Nothing waits for acknowledgement. Nothing requires observation. The reef does not end because a moment passes. It does not close because a story finishes. Life continues within its walls, chambers, channels, and branches. The reef's processes will persist long after anyone leaves, silent, unseen, unstoppable. Every detail matters. Every particle, every fragment of energy, every organism contributes. Polyps feed, algae adjust, microbes recycle, sponges pump, juveniles hide, currents move, waves shape channels, night arrives. Light fades, energy continues to flow, life repeats itself. The reef functions on its own, a system without closure, a process without pause, a world that does not need spectators to persist. The reef continues even now, even after this moment passes. Every hidden microcosm, every chemical exchange, every flow of energy, every captured particle, every growth and recovery, all of it moves forward. The system repeats endlessly. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repurposed. Life persists. And long after you leave, the reef will still be working, silently, invisibly, perfectly as it always has.